It's pretty clear after week 7 that there's a few players in fantasy football that you want on your team. And I'm not talking about the obvious guys like AJ Brown, who just continues to have 125 plus yard games. No, I'm talking about the guys flying under the radar who are seeing strong usage. These are the players you want to trade for as soon as you can. Let's dive into them. And we'll begin with a guy who a lot of people probably forgot about, because that's what happens when players get injured, and it's James Conner, who is towards the end of his IR stint and should be returning soon for the Arizona Cardinals. Now, Conner's one of the best buy low running backs right now, because although this offense isn't great, it might be getting better soon. And that's because Kyler Murray should return soon. He was practicing last week. As Jay Glazer reports here, he says that the Cardinals are actually not trying to tank and get a #1 quarterback. They want to build around Kyler Murray. So in theory, this should help James Conner because it would lead to more red zone drives. And in the past, the Cardinals have shown that they don't actually want to use Kyler at the goal line to avoid future injuries. And let's not forget how dominant Conner's role has been this season when he's healthy. He played in 4 games healthy, and as you can see right here, his sample during that time, 70% of the snaps, 62% of the carries, and 49% of the routes run. This is all very solid usage. And it also doesn't factor in that he got pulled in game 4 in week 4 against the 49ers that turned into a blowout. So that skews down his role. It's actually better than it seems. So Conner ranks top 20 in running back points, but it's actually top 15 because the game that he got hurt skews his points per game since he left early. During this time, he's averaging 18 opportunities per game and 12 plus points in 3 out of 4 healthy games. So expect him to take his role right back from Amari DiMarcado or whoever starts earning touches these next few weeks for Arizona. And if the guy who has him in your league is just needing a win to try and fight for the playoffs, he might be desperate to sell him low. Now, the next man up, another running back, is Javonte Williams, who is also a solid buy low candidate right now. You see, Williams is coming off of season high usage. Now look at his snaps. He returns from injury in week 6, just 35% of the snaps, but in week 7, 53% of the snaps a season high, 63% of the carries also a season high, in what was a great game script as the Broncos led the Packers from the far majority of their week 7 matchup. And this led to some strong usage. 19 opportunities turns into 18 touches for 96 yards, but since he doesn't crack 100 yards or doesn't have a touchdown, more importantly, it doesn't look like a massive performance at just 12.5 fantasy points. It kind of blends in as an average day. But in a game where the Broncos only throw 29 times and you still get 4 targets for a Javonte Williams, it was a quietly dominant day on all fronts for him. And when you look ahead a little bit, he's had some positive matchups. A matchup against the Chiefs where he should be able to earn some targets. A sneaky good matchup against the Bills, who give it up to running backs, and a nice matchup against the Vikings as well. And if you scroll even more down through here, you'll see positive matchups against the Texans and Chargers, bottom 5 run defenses. So he's an interesting buy low option to get you into your fantasy playoffs, maybe help you even further from there as the fantasy playoffs do approach in a couple of weeks. Now we'll pivot to the wide receiver position, where Chris Olave, look, he has a big name value. He was drafted in like the 2nd or 3rd round of your draft. It might be hard to get him, but his inconsistent play might be frustrating the league manager in your league who has him. Because his frustrating play has nothing to do with him. It has to do with his quarterback, and more importantly, his quarterback's shoulder that, oh yeah, people forget this now, just injured his shoulder 3 weeks ago. It takes usually a month for that to heal. And that was evident on Thursday Night Football in week 7, where Chris Olave sees an elite 15 targets, but not even half of them are completed. Just 7 receptions. Now it's a decent day. 7 catches, 57 yards for almost 13 fantasy points. But in that matchup against Jacksonville, given that he had 15 targets, a couple of near misses in this one, you would have hoped to see more completions here. And here's the good news. He's still seeing high volume, and as Carr gets healthier, well, it should only get better. And I can't believe how underreported that has gone. Carr has an AC joint sprain, which is normally about a month to recover from. He's just been playing through it. And just to show you how good the role has been for Olave, if you look down here, the far right column is his targets. He's had 10 or more targets in 5 out of 7 games, and he's averaging just under 10 targets per game. He is top 10 in wide receiver usage this season. And he's top 10 despite Michael Thomas playing well, and obviously Alvin Kamara earning as many targets as he possibly can in the check down game. That's still pretty impressive that you're getting dominant 26, 28% of the targets for Olave. And part of these targets are the fact that he's seeing cheat code usage. He is #1 in deep targets of 20 plus yards downfield with 17. Now he only has 4 red zone targets, but that combined 21 cheat code targets ranks top 12 amongst receivers. So expect more big plays in big games for Olave as Carr gets healthier, and check out his rest of season schedule. And we can focus in primarily on these next couple of weeks as you try and get into your fantasy playoffs. Matchup against the Colts and then at home against the Bears. These are 2 of the better matchups you can find. And if you scroll a little bit more, a nice matchup against the Vikings. We just saw any decent offense this year. Now we've seen it from the Seahawks to the Ravens can put it up on the Lions defense in a matchup against the Panthers. I mean, these are like 5 out of 6 quality games coming up. So target Olave and this next wide receiver. But before we get there, 67% of people who watch these videos are not subscribed. Then it only takes 2 seconds. Maybe you don't know that you're not. So double check, hit the subscribe button. It helps me out and lets you see my future content. Now, the next wide receiver you should target is someone we talked about last week, but he went on the bye, so it's even more likely to forget about him. He put up another 0 since he was on the bye week for the guy who has him in your league, and it's T. Higgins, who who I think is the perfect time to target him in a trade. And it's been frustrating to own T. Higgins this year because he's been banged up, and then in week 6 he returns and was basically a decoy. Only 4 fantasy points, running just 56% of the routes, but a lot of people might not know that there was reports out there that he was going to be used as a decoy, and they might just think, oh, another bad game for T. Higgins. And if that's the case, well, then he hasn't been useful in over a month for the person who has him. In week 2, he puts up 29 points against the Ravens defense that was missing some pieces, but since then, absolutely nothing due to his injury. And you can see the weekly breakdown right here. He had those 11 targets in a big game in week 2, but very quietly he continues to earn targets. 7 in week 1, 8 in week 3. These were weeks where Joe Burrow was still not healthy and even getting re-injured, so it was reflected in all of the offense's performances. And then, like I said, week 6 he's a decoy, week 7 he goes on bye, so he's just out of sight right now and not seen as a priority for whoever has him, even though they probably spent a 3rd-round pick on him in their fantasy draft. And a lot has changed over the past month since the last time we really saw T. Higgins healthy. Well, for starters, Joe Burrow looks a lot better, and so does the entire offense. And so far this season, when healthy, T. Higgins is averaging 9.3 targets per game, the most out of anybody on the team during that time, even more than Jamar Chase. That's pretty interesting now that the offense looks to be clicking and is exiting the bye week. They do have a tough matchup against the 49ers. That's just another selling point as to why you can try and buy low on T. Higgins. So I'd be looking to buy T. Higgins as soon as possible, and this next running back is a pretty interesting option to target. And it is Kyren Williams, who was just placed on the IR. He will miss 4 games. He just missed 1 of them, so he has to miss 3 more games. And the entire week we're trying to figure out who's going to be the starter out of all these Rams running backs. I think you should still be buying Kyren Williams. Look, here's the deal. Darrell Henderson signed to the practice squad, and then he ended up signing to the active roster and seeing a team high at the running back position. 19 opportunities against a tough Steelers run defense. Wasn't efficient. That's basically been the story of his career, just 66 yards, but he was trusted in the red zone. He was trusted with the majority of the running back snaps and touches because Sean McVay just likes him. But like I mentioned, he wasn't efficient and saw nowhere near the same role that Kyren Williams sees as all of the 3rd downs, all of the red zone usage. No, he split work with Royce Freeman. Because in this game, as you can see right here, Royce Freeman played 42% of the snaps. That would have been the most for any running back if Kyren Williams was in this game. Kyren Williams, in terms of a player behind the starter, Kyren Williams was seeing the majority of the touches in every single game. The only game that he didn't was a game that ended up being a blowout late. And even then he saw the majority of the touches, just not the far majority. So the strategy here is if you can last a couple of games without Kyren Williams, maybe you have a great record, you feel good about your playoff chances, I would go and buy low on him because he's going to be a force once the playoffs come back with his elite role. And let's not forget how good his role has been just because he missed 1 week with injury. If you take away week 1 where Cam Akers was actually active, and then you just look when Kyren Williams was the starter, on this sample, 88% of the snaps, 80% of the carries is literally Christian McCaffrey type usage. It's that good. And 74% of the passing downs. No other running backs are seeing this type of work outside of McCaffrey. And Williams has actually been efficient this year. He's averaging 5.1 yards per touch, which ranks top 20 in the NFL, and he ranks 6th in yards created. And despite his smaller size, even missing a game, he still ranks 4th in evaded tackles. He's 6th in red zone touches and 2nd in passing game usage. And those last 2 points are important. His red zone touches and his passing game usage being that high in both of those metrics shows that he has really good fantasy cheat codes for the running back position, your targets and your red zone usage. And now if we look ahead to the fantasy playoffs, you're going to get matchups against the Commanders and the Giants, 2 solid matchups, and then a matchup against the Saints isn't ideal, but still the role that you're going to be getting, and that game's at home by the way, the role that you're going to be getting from Kyren Williams of 20 touches, 90% of the snaps potentially, it's good enough to make any bad matchup fine. So Kyren Williams is one of those sneaky buy lows because the guy who has him in your league knows he's not going to be able to use him for 3 weeks, so you can maybe send a trade-off route there. I know I'm trying to get rid of Kyren Williams in some spots just to try and bank some wins. Now let's go back to Arizona, but look at the receiving core and talk about Marquise Hollywood-Brown, who's now come off of 2 poor games in terms of fantasy, but at earning targets, still seeing good usage. So despite the past 2 weeks of not putting up fantasy points, he still has 18 targets, 9 per game during this time. Now, a lot of his struggles have to do with Josh Dobbs just looking worse and worse by the week, only completing 19 of 33 passes for only 146 yards. It's hard for anybody to be productive in this offense when this is the low quality of quarterback play you're getting. But the reason you want to buy low on Marquise Brown is because of what we talked about earlier. Kyler Murray is expected to return any week now. Practice last week, could return as soon as this week, and I kind of suspect that we'll see him this week, which only helps Hollywood Brown. Because last season, before Marquise Brown fractured his foot, he was playing out there with Kyler Murray and averaging 18.3 points per game on 10.7 targets per game. This was top 5 wide receiver production during that time. And now in Hollywood Brown's career with Kyler Murray, when DeAndre Hopkins isn't in the picture, the former Cardinal, you're getting a 29% target share for Hollywood Brown. That would rank top 10 last season. That's elite wide receiver 1 usage. And of course, DeAndre Hopkins, I bring it up because he's not on the team anymore. So Hollywood has legit top 15 upside at the wide receiver position, if not higher, once Kyler Murray returns. But based on his last 2 weeks of performance and lack of output, it's probably likely the league owner who owns him in your league doesn't view it this way. And very quietly, he continues to see the cheat code targets. Like maybe Rondale Moore will see a larger role in the offense once we get Kyler Murray back because they had success last year. But for the most part, this is probably going to be rinse and repeat for Marquise Brown, who ranks 5th in deep targets, 12th in red zone targets. That combination of 19 cheat code targets is top 12 at the position. And this cheat code usage correlates with fantasy scoring and production. So buy low on Marquise Brown before Kyler Murray returns. Now, for the second straight week in some of our videos, Rhamondre makes an appearance. Last week, he was a hold in our trade away video. This week, he is now a buy in obviously the video we're watching right now, because for the second straight week, he was productive. Because as you can see here on Fantasy Life, our official data partner, in week 7, 64% of the snaps for the second straight week for Rhamondre Stevenson, 58% of the passing down work. That's great. Only 41% of the rush attempts, but we'll touch on that in a second. It was actually Ezekiel Elliott who saw 2 more carries than Rhamondre, so he got a little bit above 50% of the carries, but it wasn't anything to that. It was just that Zeke's drives lasted longer. A couple that Rhamondre run were shorter, 3 and outs. Zeke's were a little bit longer, so we saw more plays and carries. Now, like I mentioned, the encouraging news was the passing game usage. You got 6 targets here. For the second straight week, Rhamondre saw at least 20% of the team's targets, which last year would have ranked 2nd amongst all running backs if you earn a 20% target share. And more importantly, this receiving game usage gives him a strong floor. In a game where he only sees 9 carries for 34 yards, he's still able to put up a productive day of 14.5 points because of these 6 receptions, 51 yards, over 11 points in the receiving game. So we know he has the receiving production. He ranks top 8 actually now once this updates for his 6 targets this past week. He'll have 30 targets on the season. More importantly though, if we can start to see these red zone touches, just 10 entering week 7, increase a little bit, that's where he starts to go from, okay, he's obviously a flex play RB2 to now, yeah, he's that guy you took in round 3 of your drafts, a top 10 running back. So I'd be targeting Rhamondre before this happens because the offense has looked good the last 2 weeks and it correlates with Rhamondre being more involved as a receiver. I think they're going to keep doing that. Now, I'd also target the fantasy blueprint, which is a new thing here, a new little twist that I want to let you know. The fantasy blueprint, it is something that over 4,000 people are using. You get these tools every single day of the week, waiver wire tools, rest of season rankings, game by game matchup notes, projection rankings, and a whole lot more. And now here's a little added bonus. It's optional, of course, but Vivid Picks is the partner for the blueprint. And as you can see right here, you could win up to 2 tickets to an NFL game when you enter. Somebody is going to win this. This is something that is happening out of anybody who signs up for the blueprint over the next week. So it might not be that high of a number of people. You could be competing with just like 100 people or less for free tickets to a game. Now, to access the fantasy blueprint, where you'll get all those tools every day of the week that thousands of people are currently using, you just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. And that will take you to this page where you just follow those 2 quick and simple steps on the screen. And here's the deal. It's $5 for the entire year, but if for some reason you don't make your fantasy playoffs, which is the whole goal here of this blueprint, get you into the dance, and from there you catch some steam, you get some luck, you have the best players. But if you don't get there, could be for any reason, bad luck, injury, whatever it is, I'll just refund the $5 that it costs for the blueprint. This is 100% risk-free. So to get access to the blueprint and now get into the raffle to get some NFL tickets, again, that's only for this week, those NFL tickets, scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. And now let's discuss Chris Godwin and why you want to trade for him. Look, he just continues to get crazy good targets, but put up average results. This past week for the Bucs, Chris Godwin actually led the team in routes run with 38, 2 more than Mike Evans, and led the team with 12 targets, 4 more than Mike Evans, but he continues not to get the touchdowns that Evans are seeing. Now, you're still getting quality days out of Godwin. 12.5 fantasy points isn't losing you a week, but it's surely not moving the needle to help you win the week. It's just average. 6 catches for 66 yards. The thing that he's missing is the touchdowns. And it's pretty crazy that these haven't happened yet, because after this week, he entered week 7 with 7 red zone targets. After this week, he now actually has 9 red zone targets, which is the 7th most in the NFL, but no touchdowns. Players with similar usage this season have at least 3, on average, at least 3 touchdowns. The touchdowns are coming for Godwin. He's been unlucky. Because if he continues to earn 26% of the team's targets like he has this year, which is a very strong, borderline elite number, it's only a matter of time until he has big blow-up games. And all the stats are pointing to Godwin looking the same. He's efficient per route, his yards per route run. He's picking up yards after the catch. Maybe, if anything, he's lost a little bit of burst after his ACL tear, but for the most part, he's looking fine, and that's proven based on him earning targets. And now if we look ahead a little bit to his schedule, 5 out of his next 6 matchups are great. A matchup against the Bills, that's beatable. The Texans, a great matchup. The Titans, a great matchup. Okay, the one bad one is the 49ers on the road, but then the Colts, great matchup. Panthers, great matchup. I mean, 5 out of the next 6 are against bottom half of the league secondaries. And then in the fantasy playoffs, he'll be facing the Packers and the Jaguars, which have been very beatable secondaries this entire season. Go buy low on Godwin now. And speaking of the Packers, Aaron Jones is somebody to target because he returned from his hamstring injury that he re-injured in week 4 against the Lions, and now he returned for a second time this past week, and as I mentioned on Twitter, he was limited. You can see right here, in week 7 when he returned, he only played 34% of the snaps, which just so happened to be the exact same that he played in week 4 when he returned from injury and re-injured his hamstring. This led to just 30% of the carries in week 7. He really wasn't involved at all. Green Bay is clearly taking it slow with him after he already re-injured it, which is the smart thing, and it's pretty clear that they weren't trying to push him, because in a game where they could have used him mounting a comeback in the second half, well, they didn't. Now, despite Jones being limited in this game to just 11 touches, as usual, rinse and repeat. He was still highly efficient. 57 total yards, averaging over 5 yards per carry in this game, is averaging over 8 yards per touch on the season, only behind Devon Achane out of all players in the NFL. Now, I expect Jones to be ramped up next week, assuming there is no setbacks, because the Packers need explosive plays right now. They just lost Christian Watson. It seems like it's going to be a couple of weeks, if not more, of a recovery time by the time you're watching this. It could be a serious knee injury. Who knows? They need Jones out there. Now, Jones should have solid matchups coming up against the Vikings, definitely against the Rams and Chargers, even against the Steelers in a game where the Packers might trail. Any games that they get behind, you're going to see, since this is a bad offense, borderline maybe the worst offense in the league, definitely the last 2 games, it is probably the worst offense in the league. You're going to see Jones playing from behind, seeing some 4, 5, 6 reception games, which obviously help for fantasy. So Jones is somebody you can buy because he's in a terrible offense. He hasn't done anything due to injury this season. So maybe people are desperate who took him in like the 4th round of their draft just to get some wins and need some quality players on their team. The move there would be to trade maybe a 2-for-1 for Aaron Jones, or somebody who's coming off of a big week for Aaron Jones. Heck, maybe you can get rid of like a Deontay Foreman in a trade for somebody like Jones. Now, another running back I'm trying to target is DeAndre Swift. And look, I know nobody really wants to trade DeAndre Swift most likely, but if there was ever a time for him to be put into a package deal, or maybe somebody will listen to a trade, it's after this week when he only scored 10 fantasy points, despite the Eagles putting up 31 points on Sunday Night Football against the Dolphins. But when you look a little bit deeper into just his overall stats, and we'll take another step deeper into his usage, everything was still good for Swift. He sees 18 touches, 18 opportunities in this game, combines for 75 yards, just doesn't find the end zone, doesn't have the one big massive play that puts him over. His rushing prop in this game was 62.5, so a lot of people who bet on him just missed out and are probably frustrated as well, which that might not seem like it correlates into things, but overall, if there's negative publicity or negative thought in your mind about the player, what they did to you in the betting market, it's going to probably translate into your trade markets as well. But it shouldn't, because DeAndre Swift's usage was actually the best of the season. A season high 70% of the snaps, a season high 67% of the routes run, the passing game usage. Now, he only saw 47% of the carries, but that's because Jalen Hurts was pretty active on the ground in this game. Swift has now quietly earned 3 or more targets in 4 straight games, and during that time, he's averaging 5.5 targets per game. His role only continues to get better, because since week 2, Swift is a top 10 fantasy back. Look, if you have any shot to get him in a trade or approach the guy who has him, it's this week after a poor week. It might be your last time to do so. Now, let's look at some of the most trending players in the trade markets right now, and I want to talk about some of them, some of the guys that we haven't already mentioned, like a T. Higgins in this video. I want to talk about Jalen Waddle, a solid game, 6 catches, 60 yards, but he still hasn't had a blow-up game. That is going to come in this offense, especially after they see some easier matchups, which they didn't this past week against the Eagles. Rashad White got all of the snaps back. He got the passing game usage back. He looked good there. Still not great on the ground. I'm not shocked if the Bucs, if they win a couple more games and show that they can be a playoff contender, won't be totally shocked if they try and sign somebody. Now, we got to talk about Bijan Robinson, who woke up after not sleeping, had crazy bad headaches, said he felt terrible, and just didn't play in the game. But unlike you're supposed to do, the Falcons just didn't put it on the injury report. Like I said, they're supposed to do it the second they know that. He gets a carry late in the game, saw a couple of snaps. I don't even know why he went out there at all. He was just trying to force it out in a close game. I get the competitor in him, but a lot of people are frustrated. And now he's coming off of his second bad game because of this, or at least suboptimal game. This is a spot where you can maybe throw a trade out there for who was a top 10 fantasy pick and is still worthy of that type of tag in trades, but it seems like his value is a little bit lower now. Now, if we go a little bit lower here, I still think Jahmyr Gibbs, I'm not trying to trade for him. He just had a big week. This is the time to trade him away, with David Montgomery likely due back after the bye week. So not this week, but the next week they have a bye week, and then you're probably getting David Montgomery back, which means you get one more game of elite Jahmyr Gibbs usage is my guess. I'd probably sell high on him now off of a massive game where he had his first touchdown, had a career high day, put up a ton of fantasy points, over 20 points. Now's probably the time to get rid of him. And now's probably the time to trade for Davante Adams, who earned the first 7 targets of the game out of the wide receivers from Brian Hoyer, and then he just kind of went quiet. Had like 48 yards early in the first half, then only gets 1 more reception or so, 2 short receptions, I believe, in the second half, and he comes out of the game late, even though the starters stay on. Who knows if there's something behind that when the game is a little bit of a blowout. Davante Adams is not happy. All the publicity is negative on his team right now, on his fantasy production. I'd throw a trade out there, as he was like a first-round pick in fantasy drafts. And I'd also continue to try and trade for David Montgomery, because look, Jahmyr Gibbs, he just had a big game. David Montgomery's going to be hurt and miss at least another week, and then the bye week, so you're not going to get him back in your lineups for 3 more weeks. Yeah, people are probably going to be frustrated by that, or at least more likely to trade him than they were a few weeks back when he had a 3-touchdown game against the Packers on Thursday Night Football. Now's the time to buy low, because once he's healthy, he'll be the guy entering the playoff stretch for your fantasy teams. So these are the players that you want to trade for before week 8. But this is only one way, if you're watching these videos, you know that, to improve your teams. The other way is the waiver wire, where guys at this point, if your waivers have cleared, are probably free. And you can check out the guys you want to target right here. Now, before you watch that video, make sure you have the subscribe button hit. It takes 2 seconds. 67% of people who watch this aren't subscribed. If you made it to the end and you're not subscribed, fix that right now. It will allow you to see my future content, and it does help me out.